Hello, my name's Anthony Ortiz. I'm a student here at Life Pacific, and I'm a part of the group that's reading the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. My passage that I was assigned to read is The Miller's Tale. A little bit of context to what this story is and kind of the background to it. To understand the Miller's Tale, we first have to understand what's happening during the prologue of the Miller's Tale, and who the Miller is in the context of the Canterbury group. We see in the prologue that the Miller, he's a big guy. You know, he has a red beard, which some may say is symbolism, because people with red hair, red beards are usually the antagonist. Now in the prologue, we see that everyone is telling their stories, and right before the knight had actually just told his story of a love triangle. And as the host begins to turn to the monk to allow him to speak, what happens is the miller drunkenly interrupts everyone and begins to tell his story. And this story, he allows us and tells us that it's going to be of a carpenter that was made a fool by his clerk, which what we now understand is that the clerk slept with the carpenter's wife. And the narrator warns that the story would be crude and raunchy. This is very important to know because then we now have a basic character profile of the miller. And I believe it gives insight into what he's telling us as the readers. Before I tell the summary of this tale, I first want to talk about the characters that are a part of the Miller's Tale. First, we see that this story is a love triangle similar to that of the Knight's Tale. We have John the carpenter. He's the older gentleman, and he's married to an 18-year-old named Allison, who in this story is described as a catch. Then we have the clerk, which we have talked about just for a moment, that he's going to be sleeping with John the carpenter's wife. His name is Nicholas. The clerk's name is Nicholas. And then finally we have Absalom from the church. We'll get into his story in just a moment. We first find out that this carpenter is a jealous man, jealous husband actually, and he wants nobody near his wife. But what ends up happening is Nicholas, right, the clerk, who is living in this man's house, begins to flirt with the carpenter's wife, Allison. And actually what we see is kind of disturbing. Nicholas flirts with Allison so aggressively in the beginning to the point where Allison actually is getting uncomfortable with it. But then eventually he sweet talks her and Allison begins to fall for him. Confusing, right? But knowing John is jealous, knowing that the carpenter is jealous, Nicholas and Allison both decide to wait to sleep together until they trick John the carpenter. And then finally, let's actually talk about Absalom. This is where he comes in. Absalom, he's a church boy, and he falls in love. This is love at first sight. He's pretty much a medieval simp. He serenades Allison. He showers her in money. But this guy gets nothing. No play. Poor Absalom, right? Anyways, one Saturday, Nicholas and Allison actually get their chance to trick John. Boom. John's getting fooled at this point. See, when John gets back from his trip, he starts to ask around and ask about his clerk, Nicholas, which then he finds out he has been in the room looking up at the sky, talking to the heavenlies. And then what happens is John walks into the room and asks him what's going on. And Nicholas tells the carpenter that he has received a vision from God. You see, what this vision was is that there would be a second flood. See, this is where the prank begins to start to unravel. Nicholas is telling the carpenter that a second flood is coming. So they have to get tubs, hang it from the ceiling, and then get in it to sleep. Nicholas, Allison, and the carpenter. All three are the only people who know about this trick, know about that this flood is coming. So night falls, and Nicholas and Allison jump in, and so does John the carpenter. But when the carpenter falls asleep, Nicholas and Allison jump out and sleep with each other. Boom, they fooled him. But here comes Absalom. He ends up yelling out of the window while Nicholas and Allison are sleeping together. And he's yelling out of the window, begging for a kiss from Allison. But this is what happens. It's kind of gross. Allison sticks her butt out, and Absalom ends up kissing that. It's gross. So, because he's been fooled, since Absalom had been fooled, been made fun of, he wants revenge, so he comes back with a hot rod. Only this time, when he cries out, Nicholas is the one who sticks his butt out. And Absalom hits him with the hot stick. Bro gets burned. So what ends up happening is Nicholas starts yelling for water. Because Nicholas gets burned by Absalom, like literally, he ends up yelling and crying out for water, which John the carpenter then hears. Remember, he's up, tied to the roof in a tub. So he actually thinks that because Nicholas is calling out water, that the flood has come. So what he does is he takes his axe and he cuts the string that the tub is tied to, and he falls from the ceiling down to the ground, falls, breaks his arm. And to make it even worse, after he falls and the whole town knows what has happened, Nicholas and Allison tell everyone he's gone mad. Literally the whole entire town thinks that John's crazy. Nicholas and Allison then get to be together. In Absalom, he got his revenge, but doesn't actually win the girl. That's the end of the story. There's no moral, no ethical takeaway, but I do believe that there is something we can take from this story, whether it's from the Miller or it's from Chaucer. Now, obviously, this story is a comical one that actually borrows from the French literary theme of the fabliau, which it takes and deals with indecent matters in a comical way. That's what a fabliau is. So as a reader, what do we end up taking as meaningful and what do we end up taking as comedy? And I believe that the answer lies in the symbolism that's present, most notably the biblical symbolism of the second flood. Now, as we recalled, Nicholas had tricked John the carpenter into believing that a second flood was imminent. Now, this was a prank, but the result of all these tricks left John badly injured, his wife with another man, and the whole town thinking he was crazy. Now, yes, the flood was a prank, but the imagery of a flood that causes disaster is really what happened to John. It's the situation he ended up in. It was a flood. Maybe the Miller is telling the reader and telling actually the group of storytellers that you get what you deserve. In that John was a jealous husband, and the result of his jealousy was his flood. We see multiple people in this story get what they deserve. Absalom, who fell in love with another man's wife, ends up kissing her butt. That's tough, right? And Nicholas, who was sleeping with another man's wife, gets a hot rod up his. Tough. Is it possible that the moral of this story, that Miller is trying to portray the idea that what goes around comes around? Possibly. Another analysis that I took from this tale was Chaucer's criticism of religion. See, I think this is a viable analysis, being that at the time of this writing, and what I learned, is that the state of the authority of the church was being questioned. So the church was losing its authority. And the fact that Chaucer himself was not a Catholic might point to the idea that Chaucer was criticizing religion. Could it be that all this trouble that ensued because of the religious lie and foolish belief of Nicholas and John is Chaucer just saying that it is foolish to believe in the authority of the church? Or even more so, that belief in religion will leave us metaphorically falling from the roof with broken arms. All of this comedy, brawliness, lust, negativity that is portrayed in the tale of the Miller also may be a reflection of the Miller's character even more. just the fact that he's making up a story of a man sleeping with another man's wife tells of his lustful character. And the way that he tells it in a comedic manner shows a little about how he may see the world. Even more so, and I'll leave us with this, is that his story shows us how crude the miller really is because of the language that he uses. All in all, I do believe this story is a great comedic story. I think it's pretty funny, and I think that Chaucer's ability to use the criticism, not the criticism, but the conflict of person between person and weaving together multiple different persons' conflicts allows us as the readers to find ourselves in one of the shoes of the characters in this story, whether it be Absalom, Nicholas, Allison, or even John the Carpenter. Well, thank you for listening. This is my kind of summary of my reading.